Welcome to this new automotive news video for Wednesday, March 25th, 2026. And today we're going to talk about electric cars. Because contrary to what many people believe in reality, their sales have only been dropping since the beginning of the year. In fact, the decline is even accelerating. I'll share many interesting figures on this topic. By the way, on a related topic, we'll talk about Honda, which just today officially announced the cancellation of one of its electric cars. We'll also discuss Dumoray Powerglide, the automotive supplier that just announced it will close a French factory, and we'll talk about Volkswagen and, more broadly, the German automotive industry, which, in order to diversify their activities, and especially to make up for some of the losses related to the automotive sector, is getting into the war industry, the defense industry, and the production of all kinds of military devices. Before that, I'll still give you the good news of the day, since yesterday it was confirmed that in France, in Lorraine, one of the largest natural hydrogen deposits in the world was found. According to estimates from the CNRS, the National Center for Scientific Research, there would be 34 million tons of hydrogen contained there, a deposit that may interest the transportation sector. Because even though most manufacturers have abandoned hydrogen-powered passenger cars, except maybe BMW and Toyota, hydrogen remains extremely relevant for decarbonizing the road transport sector, heavy trucks if you prefer, as well as public transportation, hydrogen buses, for example, or even maritime transport. It remains to be seen now whether the government plans to do something with it, or if. Just like the 5 billion barrels of oil in French Guiana, or the lithium found in the Massif Central, France won't use them. Now we're going to tackle the topics that were listed in the summary of this video, a video that I hope will interest you. If that's the case, don't hesitate to show your support, as usual, by supporting my channel for free. For that, you can leave a like on this video, subscribe for the next ones, boost this one if the option appears for you, and, of course, leave a little comment where you share your opinion on today's news. We'll begin by discussing electric cars because, contrary to what you might hear in a lot of media, especially on TV or radio, global electric car sales are no longer increasing. Since the beginning of 2026, and we're actually seeing a decline that's accelerating as the months go by. Remember, I talked about this in another video. In January 2026, it was 3% fewer sales worldwide. Once again, I want to emphasize that compared to January 2025. And now we've just learned that in February 2026, the drop was even bigger, with 11% fewer electric cars sold than in February 2025. And if we compare to the last 23 months of 2025, that's a 40% decrease, so it's a huge drop. Since the beginning of the year, it's an average of 8% less compared to early 2025, knowing that, obviously, this drop is not at all the same in every region of the world. I'll give you some numbers now. Let's go continent by continent. And you'll see that there is still a pattern, a motif, a trend, if you prefer, that we notice market by market. We'll start with the two markets shown on this graph, which grew in 2026 and 2025. The first is Europe, up 21%. This will likely continue in the next few months, especially due to rising fuel prices. We know that Europeans are starting to take an interest in electric cars, especially used electric cars. We'll see if this also translates into sales of new electric vehicles, a European trend that is largely due to the French, German, and Italian markets. Three countries that, in recent months, have increased aid and subsidies for the purchase of electric cars, especially Italy, which since October 2025 has implemented assistance that can reach up to 11,000 euros in bonuses for individuals and 20,000 euros per electric car for businesses. Then there's the rest of the world, with an increase of 84%. So that's all the countries that are not part of the European Union, the United States, or China. There's a very big increase, plus 84%, but that's because we're dealing with small volumes. If a brand sells 5 cars one year, and the next year it sells 15, that will be a 200% increase. It's very impressive on paper, but that doesn't mean it's a commercial success. A dynamic rest of the world, largely supported, for example, by South Korea, where electric car sales have tripled since the beginning of the year, with, there too, subsidies that have increased significantly since the beginning of 2026 and which can reach up to 22 million won per car, which is about 13,000 euros. In North America, so the United States plus Canada, it's down 31% compared to February 2025. With some manufacturers particularly affected, for example Ford, it's a 70% drop in electric car sales, Kia is down 52%, and Honda, I think they hold the record, an 81% drop in electric car sales, which started in October 2025. Here's the chart again. The United States is shown by small red squares. Notice that starting in October, they're much smaller than before September. Do you know what happened in October 2025? Since October 1st, 2025, the subsidies that went up to about 7,000 euros, which made it possible to switch to electric cars, have been removed. Where the drop is the most impressive, not in proportion, but in absolute value, is China, which is shown in yellow. On our little chart, that's minus 26%. But until now, it was the leader, the number one in electric cars. That's still the case, but it's much less obvious than before. So, what happened? What happened is that since the beginning of the year in China, there has also been a reform of automotive taxation. There were no taxes before on electric cars, but now there is a tax, a small one, 5%, instead of the 10% that is normally applied to other vehicles. Plus, the Chinese government, which stopped the subsidies for the development of electric cars at about the same time. Well, as soon as that was put in place, sales started to drop. And in February, it's actually 26% in China compared to February 2020. And if we look compared to the last month of 2025, the drop must be over 50%. So, everywhere in the world, when there are subsidies, electric cars sell. When there are no more incentives or taxes match those of combustion vehicles, interest in these vehicles quickly declines. Remember, Antonio Filosa, director of Stellantis, said there's no natural demand for electric cars. These numbers show what he meant. Now, even if you're against electric vehicles, there's absolutely no reason to be happy about these numbers. Because in reality, this is one of the worst scenarios that could happen to our European manufacturers, who will have to face a much slower rise in electric car sales than expected, and who will probably have to, for many more years, both pay billions of euros to develop their electric cars to keep up with the Chinese manufacturers. But at the same time, they will also have to pay billions of euros to develop new combustion engines, to certify the existing ones to the new Euro standards, for example, for Europe, to make them more reliable, and also for the markets that continue to buy combustion engine cars. And when you look at these numbers, you realize that cars with combustion engines or hybrid engines will be sold for much longer than they had hoped. So our European brands are really going to have to make a prolonged stretch, which will cost them a lot, and which on top of that will make them miss out on some of the economies of scale they could have hoped for until now when it comes to producing electric vehicles. So in the end, it's probably their profit margins that will plummet in the coming years, and there will likely be more and more layoffs. By the way, just a quick note, since we're talking about layoffs and redundancies, and that probably illustrates very, very well everything I just told you. The equipment manufacturer from Marais, Powerglide, which already closed one of its factories in France, in Strasbourg, last January, has just announced that it now plans to close its French factory in Andrézieux, in the Loire region. A factory that previously made gearboxes was set to be modernized to produce various systems for electric and hydrogen vehicles. As mentioned at the start of this video, the hydrogen vehicle that likely won't happen in France since all manufacturers have focused on electric cars. But the investments for electric cars never actually came, since the management at Marais Powerglide considered that, in the end, the growth of electric cars wasn't significant enough to make it worth getting into. Quite simply, these 260 jobs are now hanging on ZF's decisions, which is another German equipment manufacturer, the main client for the gearboxes produced in this factory. So that's one of the direct consequences, what we're experiencing right now, all this uncertainty about the future of the automotive industry. And by the way, they're not the only ones who have suffered from it recently, since Honda just announced today that it is ending its partnership with the manufacturer Sony, the company that makes TVs. Normally, the two had developed an electric car that was supposed to be released. It was the Afeela. In the end, it will never be marketed, as Honda decided that there still isn't enough demand for electric cars. But even if it had made it to the marketing stage, the Afeela was still quite a dud, since Honda and Sony wanted to sell it for $60,000 for a claimed range between 400 and 500 km WLTP. Now, at that price, you can get 700, 800, so it was already obsolete before it even came out. Just before that, we were talking about ZF, the German equipment manufacturer. You should know that in Germany, they're currently trying to deal with all the unexpected issues affecting the automotive world, to diversify, to redirect themselves toward the military industry, the defense industry. That's the case, for example, at Volkswagen, where they're currently negotiating with Israel to be able to produce in Germany, in a factory, the one in Osnabrück, where they used to manufacture Volkswagen T-Roc, to manufacture there instead various military components, especially those used to operate the famous Iron Dome, the Israeli anti-missile system. At BMW 2 weeks ago, they unveiled a new hybrid V10 diesel engine. Still, for the planet, that's a 1900 horsepower engine designed to equip tanks. There's also ZF, which we were just talking about a few moments ago, who officially, a few days ago, signed a contract to develop future hybrid engines for the European battle tank, the MGCL. At Fleur, another German automotive supplier, they signed a contract to supply drone engines. Most of these companies explained that this would help preserve jobs at factories whose production lines had been shut down, because fewer cars are being sold, or simply fewer parts. So yes, it's definitely a very unusual time we're living through right now. In France, we're not any better off. Let's remember that it's been several months now that we've more or less known that Renault will also be making drones by employees who more or less refuse, since they explained that they were hired to make cars, not military equipment. We'll see where all this leads us. In the meantime, we've covered today's topics. I hope you found this video interesting. If that's the case, I'm counting on you to show it by liking this video, by subscribing for the next ones, by becoming a supporter through the join button below this video. I'll see you tomorrow for the next one. Bye.